People, what are some dark secrets in the place you work at? I worked as a janitor at a church where the youth group leader was sleeping with almost every female member of the youth group. The girls all saw it as a fun club and treated him like their harem. He regularly met with them at the church after hours for whatever they wanted, all the way up to and including physical relations. I'm talking nearly a dozen girls here. He was married, in his late 30s, and had 2 kids. Why did I stay quiet? Simple. He had dirt on me before I had anything on him. I usually did my work after hours, so no one would bother me, and I smoked weed at work a lot. He caught me a few times, but he said it was fine as long as I kept it out of sight. We became pretty good work friends, but never hung out outside of the church. The first time I walked in on him having a counseling session with a girl, he reminded me of all the things he'd done for me, so I kept quiet. Over time, he seemed less concerned with me being around or knowing what he was up to, especially when he started scheduling these meetings on nights when I was the only one working, almost like I was his lookout. I've since quit, moved, and cut ties with everyone there. I still check the news to see if he ever gets caught. So far, nothing. As for why I haven't exposed him now, the rest of the staff at the church was always really nice to me, and the congregation was full of good people. I don't want to destroy something that means so much to so many innocent people. If it comes to light, it will, but I won't be the one to set it off. Before we continue, do us a quick favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. A place I used to work at some 10 years ago, we went on a company trip to a ski resort. We were all supposed to share rooms. I got paired up with a dude in my team, but I noticed a lot of my older coworkers got co-ed rooms. I asked one of the girls that had helped out to arrange the trip how come some were splitting rooms boy-girl. It turned out a lot of people were lovers, and whenever there were company trips, they shared rooms and basically spent the whole trip banging each other. And the company helped them out when arranging the trips, so they got paired up in the same room. When the trip was over, they all went back to their husbands and wives. Story 3. I worked for a large company, and, while running an analysis, I discovered a serious issue with the system calculating salespeople's salaries across the U.S. The salesmen were delivery drivers in a food service business, and the system was designed to calculate their commission based on total sales, excluding sales tax. However, I found that the system was removing sales tax twice, once at the start and again at the end. As a result, every salesperson in the continental U.S. was being paid about 8% less than they were owed. I quickly ran the numbers and realized that for just my 8 drivers, this meant they were missing out on roughly $5,000 to $7,000 per year. After digging deeper, I discovered this issue had likely been affecting all salespeople for the past 6 years since the new system was put in place. I immediately alerted the corporate office and raised the alarm, knowing the financial impact. They insisted I was mistaken until I showed them the math. They went silent, thanked me, and I didn't hear anything more about it. 2 months later, I checked the system and saw it had been fixed, though there was no mention of back pay or any acknowledgement of the error. 6 months after that, the company sold off our division, and I was let go. Story 4. I used to work a small company, and the secretary was shared among the owners, salesmen, and some of the workers. The worst thing is that she acted all high and mighty like she owned the company, and I guess in a way she did. She got preferential treatment, and often the owner would pay her bills if she got behind. And rumor is that the owner paid off her car when she threatened to tell his wife. She was always invited to Las Vegas for trade conferences, even though she had nothing to do with the trade besides answering phones and making appointments. We all knew what really happened on those trips. Story 5. I used to volunteer at a church that ran a social services program, offering a soup kitchen and food pantry for the homeless every weekend. My usual role was outside, handing food to clients on the patio or sidewalk. We called them clients, not homeless people. One day, they were short-staffed in the warehouse, where the job was to open boxes of food, organize it, and make sure every client got an equal portion of various items, e.g., 1 box of cereal, 1 can of beans, 1 loaf of bread, etc. I was in the stockroom when I started noticing church members repeatedly coming in to take food, even though the doors hadn't opened yet for clients. After the 9th time I saw someone grab food, I asked what they were doing. They stayed silent. Then I saw one woman stuff 32 pounds of rice into her bag. A donation service brought in a box of fresh fruit, and I watched as several church members helped themselves to it, eating it on the spot. I could feel my face turning red with frustration. When the doors finally opened, a line of clients formed as usual. I remember trying to give a tray of food to one client when the woman who had taken the rice snatched a box of Oreos off my tray. The client said, "Hey, wait, I actually wanted those." I quickly took the Oreos back and told the woman, "These are for him." And she had the audacity to yell, "No, I like these. These are mine." That's when I lost it. I asked what the hell was going on. Homeless people were all around the building, and these church members were hoarding food for themselves. The entire warehouse of about 20 people stopped and stared as I raged. Some even shut the front door to keep the clients out. The church director tried to calm me down by saying, "We, as volunteers, deserve the cream of the crop." That's when I lost it even more. I told them they should be ashamed for acting so high and mighty, thinking they were helping the poor while taking donations and the best food for themselves. In the heat of my outburst, I revealed that I had just secured a deal to bring thousands of pounds of food to the shelter, but after this incident, I was going to cancel it and find a different shelter to help. That was the moment I realized this kind of embezzling had been happening for years. When I got home, I broke down crying. I never went back to that church or shelter. A month later, the church director who had defended their actions actually passed away of a heart attack. A small part of me wonders. Never mind. Story 6. I worked for a multi-level marketing MLM company until a few months ago. Promotions were based purely on performance, not managerial skills. So if you did well for just 2 weeks in a row, you'd get promoted to a position where you could see how the whole operation ran. The interview process? Total bait and switch. When I first started, I had no idea we'd be going door-to-door selling products. They don't mention that part in the interviews. They sell it as an entry-level management job with unlimited earning potential, which sounds like a dream to someone who hasn't done any research on the company or the industry. And they know most new hires won't bother. Many of my coworkers were uneducated, living paycheck to paycheck, and just desperate for any opportunity. They weren't looking for skilled, ambitious people. They wanted people hungry enough to stick around long enough to bring in some cash before they realized it was all a scam. Some employees were even homeless. I tried to help where I could, but the pay, 100% commission, made it almost impossible to survive. The thing is, some people made a lot of money. The top salespeople got rewarded with ski trips, vacations to Cancun, all that good stuff. They were making bank because they earned a bonus every time one of their trainees made a sale. After a few promotions, they'd get their own office. But here's the kicker. These were great salespeople, not managers. So most new offices ended up failing within a few months. The company's strategy was to hit a market hard, milk it, and then abandon it for a couple of years. We were selling AT&T U-verse subscriptions, so they'd hit areas right as people's contracts were up. Meanwhile, the company presidents were making millions, even as the offices came and went like clockwork. My branch was a mess. The branch manager was charismatic and motivational. He loved giving us pep talks each morning and banned any negative talk in the office. But behind the scenes, he was a total sleaze. He'd talk down on certain people interviewing for positions, and his practices were downright discriminatory. Some of those people could have easily sued him. He had a habit of hiring young, attractive women, only to sleep with them at company parties. My direct supervisor was also involved in some messy stuff with our assistant branch manager, ABM, even though the ABM's husband worked there too. The manager eventually fired the ABM, deciding it was better to let him go because his production was low. He had just had a baby and couldn't work as much. We were pushed to work over 12 hours a day, with management tracking our every move to make sure we were still knocking on doors late into the night, even after 9 p.m., which is illegal in most places, and AT&T specifically asked us to stop much earlier. The office had been struggling for a while, and the way territories were assigned was based on your production. So, if you weren't hitting your numbers, they'd assign you to tougher areas like Section 8 housing, places where people can't afford much, making it even harder to sell. It's a vicious cycle, and upper management couldn't care less. Eventually, my manager had a heart attack from all the stress and quit without telling us. Our branch was absorbed by another office, and I took that as a chance to finally get a surgery I'd been putting off. When I came back, the office had already closed. I didn't even get my last paycheck. Honestly, I was too disgusted to fight for it. I have plenty more stories about how MLMs operate if anyone's interested. Most people are skeptical of them. Trust me, I was when I first started. But they're experts at making seductive promises and showcasing the few successful people involved, which is how they keep attracting hundreds of new recruits every day. I'm just glad I saw the ugly side of it, so now I can tell the door-to-door salespeople to get lost before they get caught in the same trap. Story 7. I used to work at a small computer repair shop, and there was this guy at the front counter who had a history of crossing boundaries with female employees. Long story short, I started noticing a concerning pattern. He would take in computers from our most attractive customers to fix them, but the truth was, he didn't really know what he was doing. As the lead hardware tech, I'd end up fixing most of the actual problems. It was frustrating because it meant I had more work than I'd planned for, which was stressful enough on its own. But it turns out, he wasn't just incompetently fixing computers. He was booting their drives externally, going through their photo libraries, stealing pictures, and creating a library of them. Me and another guy decided to take matters into our own hands. We swapped out his work computer's hard drive and installed it into a more powerful machine, supposedly to help him with his job. We got the evidence we needed, including the photos he had locked behind his account. We took everything to management, but they brushed it off. The guy still works there, likely still doing the same thing. I was disgusted, so I quit, filed a complaint with the State Bureau of Labor, and walked away. I'm just waiting for that scandal to blow up. It's only a matter of time. He was so sloppy about covering his tracks, it's almost like he didn't care. Story 8. I once did some private contracting work at a building that had been around since the 50s. It was a large warehouse with several offices and rooms added on inside. Most of my job involved tearing down the old offices and equipment to make space for the new owners to store their products. The building used to house a company that made electric motors, so there was a lot of equipment and old stuff inside. One day, I was asked to tear down a corner room that used to be the men's and women's restrooms. There was some controversy surrounding the previous company due to the amount of sexual harassment that had occurred in a space where men and women worked together. The standard demolition procedure was to clean out the room, clear the roof, tear down the walls, and clean up what was left. Inside, there wasn't much to clear out, so I decided to start on the roof. I climbed the service ladder outside the bathroom and began tossing down various pieces of clutter. I found some empty boxes, which I filled with trash and dropped down. Then, in a hidden corner behind some air vents, I found a crate of rags, next to another crate that had been turned over to act as a makeshift stool. While cleaning up, I came across a 70s-era tapioca pudding sitting on the roof. When I picked it up, a small hole underneath it was revealed, and I peered down. To my surprise, it led directly into one of the stalls in the women's bathroom. As I continued with the demolition, I noticed the walls separating the men's and women's restrooms had several holes poked through the drywall, creating a direct line of sight from one stall to the other. On the men's side, I also found some old 80s-era corno stuff behind the pipes and toilets. It wasn't exactly a dark discovery, but one thing remains unanswered. We'll never know who the tapioca peeper really was. Story 9. Years ago, I worked for a diamond jewelry company where my boss was caught embezzling money by creating fake vendors that the company paid for IT services. My team looked up to him, and we couldn't believe that his entire identity was fabricated. One day, the FBI showed up and dragged him out of the building. It turned out he was embezzling money from us to pay off another company he'd done the same thing to. But that company wasn't the type to go to the authorities. A few days after he was out on bail, we got the news that he had committed suicide. Early this morning, he drove to a remote, high-speed road and threw himself in front of a truck. It was surreal. Story 10. I work with people who have traumatic brain injuries, and the darkest thing I've come to understand is that some of them are still fully aware. The person they were before the accident is still in there, but the connection between thought and action is broken. There was a young guy I worked with, not much older than me. He had tried to off himself in prison. He was too young to have been locked up for something like murder, just a skinny redneck kid. No one really knew what he had been in for because his sister never bothered to find out. She left him in horrible conditions for years before finally placing him in our care. In his lucid moments, he was funny, sharp, and full of personality. But then, without warning, he would slip into these empty episodes. His face would go blank, he wouldn't speak, wouldn't move, wouldn't respond to touch. If anyone tried to make him stand or even shift his leg, he would scream in terror. In those moments, I knew he was still in there, just trapped, confused, and afraid. It was like staring at someone through a locked door, knowing they're home, but unable to reach them. I once read Dante's Inferno, where self-offing cases are turned into gnarled trees, their branches constantly torn apart by harpies. And I realized, for him, that wasn't just a metaphor. His hell is real, and in his eyes, I'm the harpy. Story 11. Large companies don't like to spend money on environmental cleanup, so they do a lot of illegal stuff. I work in the hazmat industry, mainly spill recovery. If you work in industry, you need to look at your company's environmental policies. The company I work for works pretty closely with the EPA and our state environmental management agency, so we do a lot of jobs where other companies screwed up. Lead contamination is stupid high in so many places. I've seen visible mercury literally swept under a rug so that companies don't have to pay for remediation. This will get on you, track throughout, and it will stay on your clothes or shoes for so long. Acid spills where the company wants to save some money, so they wash it off into public freshwater sewers. Story 12. I used to work at a small hospital that didn't have a designated morgue, just a room labeled utility closet, which was actually used to hold bodies. Since the ER was on the opposite side of the building, transporting deceased patients meant wheeling them through the hallways. To keep things discreet, we'd cover the body with piles of laundry, making it look like just another load heading to the wash. It was an unspoken rule. Nobody wanted to alarm visitors or tip them off that a dead body was passing right by them. Story 13. I work at a fast food restaurant, and our main chef is a bit of a weirdo. I'm usually at the front with customers, but I often hear him laughing in this creepy, high-pitched way from the kitchen. It really freaks me out, but the customers don't seem to care. Sometimes, his friend, who has a mental disability, comes by to order, and it always takes him forever to decide what he wants for lunch. My boss even gave him a job for a while, but he scared the customers off, so that ended quickly. One day, after hearing my coworker laugh like a maniac again, I looked over my shoulder to see him cuddling the burger he'd just made as if it were a stuffed animal. I brought it up to our boss, saying it was unhygienic and disrespectful to customers, but nothing ever changed. The worst part? This guy and his friend live next door to me, and I can hear his creepy laugh at night from his weird pineapple-shaped house. Story 14. I work as an aviation maintenance technician for a large and fairly well-regarded airline based in Europe, which frequently operates flights to North America. Recently, the company decided to start outsourcing some of its longer, scheduled maintenance work, specifically C-checks, to Mexico in an effort to cut labor costs. When we got one of the planes back, everything appeared to have been serviced, every box checked off, except for some electrical work that the Mexican team wasn't authorized to do. For good measure, someone on our team decided to perform an overhaul on the wing actuators and replace the ones that were deemed unserviceable. That's when things took a turn. When a panel on the left wing was removed, they discovered major corrosion damage, brown/gray residue, where the metal had started eroding, likely from water or another cause. The same issue was found on the right wing, at the same location where the wings connect to the fuselage. It was bad enough to ground the aircraft for months while the structural repairs were carried out. Now, it could be just the older guys venting, but almost all of them agree. The damage was so severe that the wings could have potentially snapped off during flight. The company had planned to send 2 more aircrafts to Mexico for maintenance, but after the union got involved and started flexing some muscle, those plans were put on hold. Story 15. This didn't happen to me, but my dental assistant teacher once had to cover for a new dentist who made a huge mistake. He accidentally pulled the wrong tooth on a patient. Instead of admitting the error, she quickly told the patient they had just discovered some decay on the neighboring tooth and, as a courtesy, they'd remove it for free. So, the guy unknowingly lost 2 teeth, but walked away thinking he got a great deal. Story 16. I once sat in the boardroom of a major industrial agency during the planning of a massive project and watched as the room fell silent when the budgeting section for expected loss of life came up. From my experience, when CEOs say safety is their #1 priority, they usually mean it. The real challenge is getting everyone else to take it just as seriously. For this particular project, they budgeted for 3 fatalities based on statistical projections from the total man-hours involved. A reserve was set aside in case the number climbed to 6. Each death was estimated to cost the company $1.7 million, covering fines, legal fees, lost productivity, and other expenses. It was a sobering discussion, but an important one. It put a dollar value on human life in a way that even the most profit-driven minds in the room couldn't ignore. And it reinforced a critical point. One fatality is costly, but a mass casualty event, 3 or more deaths, could trigger a worksite shutdown, easily costing the company $20 million or more per day. Believe it or not, government occupational health and safety regulations have serious teeth, sharp enough that even massive petroleum companies think twice before cutting corners. Story 17. I used to work at a place where coworkers would steal from each other just to sell their product for pure profit. The food was disgusting, spoiled, rotten, molded, just completely awful. Had to emphasize how gross it was because it was truly nasty. If we complained about the food, we got written up and told they'd take care of it. But what they really did was send it downstairs, repackage it, and sell it to a different part of the business. We often worked without breaks, constantly on our feet. The bosses only cared about appearances. Even though we were unionized, the union was corrupt. To get better shifts or make any decent money, you had to pay off the union bosses. And did I mention we were selling day-old, molded, and spoiled food to 30,000 people every single day we were open? I don't work there anymore. It went completely against my morals and ethics. The day I quit was the happiest day I've had, and I'll never look back. The real dark secret? We were probably poisoning people every day, and we were told, who the hell cares? Story 18. I interned for a nonprofit that was supposed to help struggling families, but I discovered they had a disturbing practice. They would intentionally turn away parents who needed food for their children if a staff member's birthday was coming up. Instead of using the funds to help those in need, they would redirect the money to throw themselves a party, writing it off as a company expense or petty cash. Edit. To address some questions, yes, I reported them. I brought it to the attention of their president and also filed a formal complaint with the state, including my name and the dates of my internship. I have no idea what came of it since the organization is still operating. For context, this nonprofit provides food assistance, clothing, and help with bill payments for qualifying families. Story 19. I guess it's not really that dark or a big secret, just something very few people know about. In the 70s and 80s, most commercial beekeepers in Canada poisoned all or almost all their hives to death every fall. The hives were then replaced by packaged bees in spring from the US, used for the summer, and then killed again in fall. This was done just because packages from America were cheaper than the medication and labor involved with overwintering your hives. Especially as you can lose anywhere from 5% to 50% of your hives over winter. This doesn't happen anymore as the price of packages now vastly exceeds the cost of wintering your hives. Even if it did become economically feasible again, I can't see it happening as the public outcry would likely be huge if people found out this was happening. Like I said, not really a secret, just something few people remember. Story 20. At any given time, at least half of the people handling your food, whether in restaurants, grocery stores, or other retail settings, are likely dealing with a cold or flu and are probably contagious. Most service industry jobs don't pay well enough or offer benefits that allow employees to take sick days, and management often pressures them to come in anyway because they can't afford to be short-staffed. Story 21. I don't work there anymore, but here's a past story. I used to work in the mailroom and office services department of a large health insurance company, handling shipping, receiving, and making sure all departments had the supplies they needed. One day, our supervisor told us that a department was preparing to archive a large number of old records and needed a ton of boxes. So, we stocked up on new banker boxes and emptied out printing paper boxes for them to use. The next day, completely out of nowhere, there was a massive round of layoffs. My coworkers and I stood by the windows, watching as lines of employees carried their belongings out in the very boxes we had just supplied. Story 22. I worked for a place where the IT manager treated company property like his personal inventory. He took home dozens, possibly hundreds, of computers for himself and donated many to the religious school where his kids attended, his wife worked, and where he served as a deacon. He also handed out computers to the school district superintendent and various executives. The corruption didn't stop there. He and these same executives hired their own family members, putting them on the payroll with little regard for qualifications. He even placed his own mother in a school as an IT technician. Despite her being completely incompetent, she couldn't pass the same basic test required of other techs, who faced termination if they failed. One summer, he fired the district's Linux administrator and replaced him with his 16-year-old sister, his cousin, and two 17-year-old daughters of executives, all on the district's payroll. He also brought in his unemployed banker brother-in-law as a database administrator, though that guy spent his workdays at a construction site instead. The level of nepotism and corruption was absolutely staggering. Story 23. There are some secrets, though whether they're dark or not is up for debate. The first one that comes to mind is when the management discovered that one of the employees was homeless and had been living in the warehouse just a week before Christmas. They fired him. Considering this is Illinois, where the winters aren't exactly mild, that decision was especially harsh. Another one was when $500,000 worth of tools and tool storage disappeared in a single night. They never recovered the merchandise or even found the truck. As for the promotions, they were often based on oral favors. This happened at another job as well, but what made it worse at the second one was that we sold sporting goods. The management would use the camping cots from the stowaway section in the upstairs loft during the overnight shifts for their fun time sessions. Story 24. I used to work at a weld shop that made a lot of products for military contracts. Unfortunately, shortcuts were taken at every opportunity, which compromised the quality of the products. Welds that were supposed to be inspected by a certified weld inspector, CWI, were never checked. Documents were falsified. A lot of items went out the door to the military and other government organizations that should never have left the shop. On top of all that, safety precautions were virtually non-existent. The owner himself once tried to get me to weld on a 16-ton frame while it was suspended by a crane with a 10-ton capacity. He wanted me to stand under it and weld the bottom. That's just one of many dangerous situations he tried to put me in. One day, he told me to do something I didn't know any better than to question. Then, an older welder stopped by and warned me to stop immediately because it could kill me. A few seconds later, the piece of hydraulic equipment I was working with failed and flew right past where I had been sitting. If it weren't for that old welder telling me to stop, I'd be dead. Story 25. I used to work in childcare while I was at university. The majority of kids there were pretty good, but around 1 in every 30 kids were horrible. So, there was one in particular who was a little jerk. Wouldn't pay attention, annoying, and anytime someone even said something to him, he'd get physical and act like the victim when the staff confronted him. I honestly couldn't stand him, but after a year of being there I realized he was a troubled kid, so I thought I'd try to be easier on him. I was hard but fair with the kids so they wouldn't mess around with me, but I'd give them more freedom and playing time. I told him to come straight to me if anyone gave him any trouble so I could ensure they were separated and that he wouldn't get into trouble. He was good at first, and I started to see a softer side to him, but he eventually just slipped back into his old routine of punching then acting like he did nothing wrong. Turns out a close family member had been essaying him since he was like 4, and he didn't want to identify who it was because he didn't want to get anyone in trouble. We were notified because some family members had to stay away from him, so if they came to pick him up, we'd refuse. Parents would constantly complain about him, and some even confessed to me how much they hate him and how his mother must be a terrible parent. I just kept my mouth shut about it and tried to change the topic. There's a sweet kid in there somewhere, but he just doesn't show it. I often think about what he's doing now. Story 26. I had a fling with my district manager's daughter. He's a jerk, she's attractive, and everyone knows about it, but no one has told him. The car wash crew and some people in the office are involved in selling weed, and my former mentor was pretty deep into the drug scene. My district manager is pretty clueless and managed to cost the company close to $30,000 in the past month. By Friday, no one at the shop is sober by noon. It's mostly just mixed drinks, some smoke a joint, others go to the bathroom for a quick snort. We manipulate our online feedback forms so corporate doesn't come down on us. We also overestimate our project completion dates to boost customer satisfaction. They get excited when we finish 2 weeks ahead of schedule. That's all I can think of right now. Oh, the joys of working in the car industry. Story 27. While not exactly dark, it's certainly a story of massive fraud worth billions. Cisco is the world's largest manufacturer of internet networking equipment. They market themselves as the best, claiming that if you need a reliable network, Cisco is the only option. What they do to back up this claim, though, is deeply unethical and fraudulent. Here's how. When a device sends out traffic, like a router in your company's basement forwarding a YouTube video, it includes a small piece of code that indicates the device's manufacturer. Cisco's gear is designed to look at this code, and if the traffic comes from another Cisco device, it handles it without issue. But if the traffic is from a device made by a different manufacturer, it intentionally introduces errors, deleting some traffic and ignoring other messages at random. The result is a network filled with problems. If you call Cisco for help, they'll tell you it's because you're using devices from other manufacturers. They'll suggest you replace everything with Cisco products, and magically, your problems will go away. If you contact the competitors for help, they'll struggle to identify the problem and waste a lot of time, yours and theirs. The truth behind Cisco's success is simple. It's their own devices that are deliberately malfunctioning, and they blame those failures on other companies' products. It's a fraudulent business model that keeps them on top. Story 28. I used to work at a science museum, and one of the exhibits demonstrated how quickly baby chicks grow. There was a series of boxes, one with eggs, the next with 1-day-old chicks, then 2-day-old chicks, followed by 3-day-old chicks, 4-day-old chicks, and finally, 5-day-old chicks. An attendant would be nearby so kids could play with the cute, cuddly chicks. Next to this setup was a glass enclosure with a full-grown python. Early each morning, before the museum opened, all the 6-day-old chicks would be moved into that enclosure. Story 29. I worked at a Japanese restaurant owned by 2 Taiwanese women who claimed to be cousins. In reality, they were actually a couple, but they refused to admit it. It was pretty obvious to most of us, but they kept denying it. I heard stories from some of the cooks who had worked with them for years and even lived in the same house. I never really understood why they wouldn't just be open about it, as it wouldn't have been a big deal, but I think it might have something to do with a cultural aspect I'm not fully familiar with. Story 30. At my last job, the manager was a retired attorney. He had practiced law for about 25 years and was actually an excellent attorney, which is part of why he was disbarred and spent some time in federal prison for his role in a Ponzi scheme that raked in millions in the late 90s. I was the only one who knew about it for a while, and it eventually came to light shortly before I left. The surprising thing was that no one, and I mean no one, held it against him. He was still incredibly well-respected and liked, even after the truth came out among employees and some clients. He was genuinely one of the best people I've met. He even attended my law school graduation and had lunch with my parents just because I asked. I still call him every now and then just to check in and see how he's doing. Story 31. I work at a hospital, and let's just say there are plenty of dark secrets. The worst incident recently involved a nurse who got written up for negligence. She asked a patient transporter to bring blood for a patient in the ER, and the poor guy brought 2 different types. Unfortunately, she ended up administering the wrong type, which led to the patient's death. To cover her tracks, the doctor claimed the patient was too far gone to save, and they fired the patient transporter while the nurse only received her first write-up. This was actually the second patient she's killed. She's also given incorrect medications for fluids and painkillers multiple times. No one knows why she's still employed at the hospital. There's a rumor going around that she may have slept with a board member, but that's still uncertain. Story 32. I work at a hotel, and not long ago, my female coworker answered the phone, and I could hear the caller loud and clear from 5 feet away. The caller screamed, "So, are you the one clapping cheeks with my husband?" It turns out, another coworker of mine, an older woman, had been sleeping with this woman's husband during his truck driving trips when he'd stay at the hotel. Later, I found out that this same employee also hooked up with our boss a couple of times in the back room. She's in her late 40s and still works at the hotel, which is pretty wild when you think about it. Story 33. I used to work in a prison, and the level of misconduct was shocking. The number of inmates sleeping with officers was unbelievable, and several officers were on probation. We'd go on lockdown for days due to staff shortages, and officers weren't even wiping down shackles between uses. Many times, the shackles would rub against the inmates' ankles, causing them to bleed. Depending on who was stationed at the front, you could sneak things like phones or drugs through the checkpoint. Some officers were incredibly rough with the inmates. The warden wouldn't approve a budget for gloves, so officers had to rely on medical to provide them. But medical was instructed not to give out gloves. We also had controlled power outages that lasted over 24 hours, and numerous doctors didn't treat patients humanely. There was so much more that went on, but it's not really worth diving into. Story 34. I work at an assisted living facility that specializes in care for Alzheimer's and dementia patients. The saddest story I encountered was about one resident who had founded a very successful company and was a passionate musician. He would volunteer to play music for the residents in his spare time since he was around their age. Then, one day, his wife told him they were going to play for the residents as usual, but instead, she dropped him off at the facility with all his belongings. She's visited him maybe 3 times in 3 years. It's heartbreaking because she controls his substantial bank accounts since they're still married. And as long as she's paying for his care, he's essentially locked in here for the rest of his life unless his family intervenes. Other than that, the facility is actually quite nice, but like most places, it's understaffed, overworked, and the workers are underpaid. Edit. I've also worked as a carny at fairs for 5 summers. The places we stay in, the long hours, and the people we deal with are things you can't even imagine. I once sent a picture of the room I was renting on the fairgrounds to both my friend and sister separately, and both of them asked if I was in a Mexican prison. Story 35. I work as a secretary in the New York State Assembly, often reassigned to different assembly members, like many others in the building, so I'm not too concerned about being identified. Currently, I'm assigned to Assemblyman Blankenbush's office from the 117th District of New York, but I'll be reassigned in a few days. From my time in the Assembly, I can tell you firsthand that it's a mess. The Assembly is constantly filled with no-shows and absentee representatives. I've lost count of the stories I've heard about Assembly members dragging us into private events, expecting us to work overtime without pay. Everything you've heard about the Assembly is true. It's essentially an old boys club. Many of the members stay late, drinking, smoking, or engaging in less than reputable activities. Just a few weeks ago, before a crucial vote, over 20 reps went out, bringing along an intern and another secretary, like myself, and they got absolutely hammered. I mean completely drunk. Then they went off to some of the less savory parts of Albany. And this kind of thing happens all the time. The vote ended up going horribly, by the way. I can't help but wonder if things would have gone differently if they'd been a bit more responsible. Story 36. I work with kids and help them with math and reading. My coworkers and I overhear a lot of conversations between parents and their children. About half the kids are being beaten at home, and we know of one little girl who's being essayed by her father. We try to tell our boss, but she won't let us do anything because she needs the parents to trust her. The next time I overhear something like that, I'm going to try to record it, and as much as I hate the cops, I'm turning those parents in. I can't deal with calming down another 5-year-old because for every problem they get wrong, they get hit or touched or worse, meaning that I don't want to keep standing by as I overhear these things. I want to provide more help than just temporarily calming down scared children. Update. Understand that I'm a minor who's called DYFS before. They don't do crap without the support of adults. My family would speak against me. My boss and the majority of my coworkers would do the same. I'm trying to get support before I report anything, so these kids get the best possible outcome. Story 37. We're a tech company that claims to focus on wildlife and the environment, but in reality, we're a joke. You know those corporate managers who speak in endless buzzwords, making it sound like they're speaking a completely different language? Yeah, we're that, but in real life. We spent hundreds of thousands of dollars designing a workplace that's practically impossible to navigate, all because someone thought the layout would be synergistic. The chairman's losing it. We spent decades on this one prototype, and if it were ever mass-produced, it would destroy the environment. Because, surprise, management has no idea what they're doing. But hey, we were proud of it. Then the chairman just gives it away. What was he even thinking? The best part? When the building got taken hostage by the local mob, the place is so poorly designed that the cops couldn't even navigate it to help us. We were stuck for hours until some 10-year-old kid saved us. We gave him our only Lapras specimen as a thank you. Story 38. Former fast food shift manager here. The general manager was banging one of the female shift managers, mostly in the morning before the rest of the openers came in. His wife didn't know. One of the other managers was banging her too. So were a couple of his friends. Another shift manager, well, a couple of them really, were also getting up in there. A couple of employees, also. And the hotel F&B manager up the road. I think the car salesman across the street got a few test drives, too. Me? Hell no. She told me about all these guys. I'm pretty sure her cave needed to be wiped down with bleach. She did give me a blowy once, said she loved the taste, and she hadn't gotten any in a week. I hadn't been laid in months, but was pretty sure sticking my dong in her would be the real life. Give a whale a tic-tac. Story 39. This isn't exactly a secret since most people are aware of it. Two managers at the company are married to each other. They met when the wife, Susan, started working here. At the time, she was married to someone else and was hired for a low-level sales position. Susan began flirting with Brett, who was also married, and it didn't take long before their affair started. During lunch breaks, she'd be in his truck, and she also had a fling with an outside sales guy. A few months later, Susan ended up in a relationship with the owner of the company, which ultimately led to her getting a promotion. She was bumped up to accounting and purchasing manager, even though this promotion came at the cost of demoting a hard-working and honest employee. But that's not the craziest part. Brett got Susan pregnant, and the two of them divorced their spouses and married each other. 9 months later, the baby was born, and it looked very much like the owner, not Brett. So, within a year, Susan went from a low-ranking employee to the top of the company, all by sleeping her way up. Now, she's untouchable because she's still involved with the owner. Susan isn't well-liked by anyone, but there's nothing anyone can do about it since she's essentially untouchable due to her relationship with the owner. Story 40. My former assistant news director hired her nanny, who had no experience and only a BA in art, to produce the 4 p.m. weekday news. While this isn't unusual in the TV industry, it's not the darkest secret at my current station. That would be the story of our former assistant news director's past. Before she became an assistant news director, she was still a reporter and married to a successful PR rep in town. They had 2 kids, and he had a solid income with major clients. He was well-liked, and everyone spoke highly of him. But she decided to cheat on him with a local sports radio host, calling into his show regularly and flirting openly. It went on for several months, and it wasn't even subtle. He even gave her a nickname on air, something like Hot Gin, referencing the song Cold Gin. Eventually, she ended up pregnant and decided she wanted a divorce. Her husband didn't want to sign off on it, and it got ugly. Apparently, she wasn't as interested in ending the marriage as she was in getting his money and pushing him out. She started using her connections with local police officers to harass him, giving him tickets for minor infractions like going a few miles over the speed limit or not clearly yielding at a stop sign. Petty stuff from just a few specific officers. She built up a false record of unsavory activity on his part and used it in court to get the divorce, full custody of the kids, most of his assets, and she married the radio host within weeks. Now, her ex-husband is out of work and struggling. I know all of this because he posted a detailed blog about the whole ordeal, and it gets passed around the office whenever new people start. She left for a new station a few weeks ago, though, so I have nothing to share with the new hires anymore. Story 41. The owner of the law firm I worked for also owns several other businesses, including a tourist/entertainment attraction. One day, a patron was using a ride there and wasn't properly secured. Unfortunately, they fell from a height of 30 feet and died instantly, with the family witnessing the whole tragedy. What makes it even worse is that the owner conveniently owns several rival law firms, which, in reality, are all part of the same operation. After the accident, one of the owner's other firms contacted the family and advised them to pursue a product liability case against the manufacturer of the ride, steering them away from seeking any compensation from the owner's own business. When we tried to look up the case in our system, there was no record other than the name of the attorney assigned to it. Even the emails related to the incident were handled directly by the firm's IT department, making it clear that the situation was being carefully managed and concealed. Story 42. I used to work for a major engineering company that handled contracts for the U.S. government. Our business model was designed to maximize billable hours. Essentially, we worked 40 hours a week, and the company took a cut from each hour we worked. At one point, they convinced the government that we were falling behind, so they approved 20 hours of overtime per week at 1.5x pay, with the company receiving the extra hourly rate. During those overtime hours, people would spend the time doing anything but work, gossiping, surfing the web, using the bathroom for personal time, swimming in a nearby river, doing crosswords, sleeping, you name it. Top management was fully aware of this and didn't care. As long as we were physically at or near the office, we got paid, they got paid, and no one asked any questions. Story 43. Trailers Plus is owned and operated by Michael Snow, who was previously known as Mickey Itkes. Itkes was a partial owner of Interactive Flight Technologies, IFT, a company widely believed to be responsible for the Swissair 111 crash, though the cause was never proven in court. The crash, caused by a fire originating from the company's entertainment system, resulted in the plane crashing into the Atlantic Ocean, killing everyone aboard. IFT made headlines for firing a private FAA certification engineer after he refused to certify their dangerous equipment. In retaliation, IFT hired another contractor, and two individuals arrived in a limousine at the engineer's apartment to seize the demo system. They handed him $30,000 in cash as compensation for what they owed, then cut the system in half when it wouldn't fit in their van. It is alleged that an attempt was made to bribe the engineer into certifying the system despite its known flaws. The contractor who replaced the engineer failed to adhere to FAA procedures, and after the crash, the system was directly investigated by the FAA. Not only was the system deemed unsafe, but the installation was rushed and didn't follow required procedures. This same heavy-handed approach from upper management at IFT is mirrored in Itkes' new venture, Trailers Plus. Story 44. I work in logistics, and while it's not super dark, I've stumbled across something strange. A few employees seem to be ushering or protecting certain truckloads as they move across the country, making it difficult for anyone to question the details of these shipments. Turns out, these loads are carrying large quantities of drugs. I started digging into the shippers and their account reps, and I've uncovered more than I expected. I don't speak up because, from what I've seen, it's mostly marijuana, and I personally don't think it's a huge issue. So, I've just let it go. But here's the thing. These account reps seem to hold all the power. They appear to be aware of each other, and sometimes work together. When a shipper starts reducing their frequency and quantity of shipments, it usually means they've switched to another provider or method of transporting freight. And that's when things go south for them. They get caught. The way the drugs are discovered always traces back to one of these account reps. However, the reps are insulated from the fallout. They have the ability to submit anonymous special check requests. While most people can't track them, I can see where they come from. These reps get frustrated with the dealers and use this request system to trigger audits of specific trailers. It's basically a random inspection that checks if the freight is being weighed and paid for correctly, and inevitably, the drugs are discovered. I haven't figured out how these reps are making money off it, but their lifestyles seem far beyond their salaries. There are a couple of possibilities. 1, they could be receiving side money. There are ways to do this without direct interaction. Or 2, they could be law enforcement or working with law enforcement to set up the busts. I've gone through their personnel files, and nothing seems off or indicates they're involved in law enforcement. One of them has been with the company for years and worked their way up the ranks. I'm not too concerned, but it's definitely piqued my interest. I can't help but wonder if one of these reps will end up dead someday. And if that happens, I'll have to decide whether to step forward with what I know. Story 45. I've worked in many hospitals, and it's shocking how rarely MDs wash their hands or use the hand sanitizing foam. Physicians seem to rely heavily on vital signs, like blood pressure, heart rate, and respiratory rate. Numbers which are often just made up by nurses or, more commonly, nurses' aides who are too busy to be accurate and just jot down numbers that sound reasonable. These fabricated numbers often lead to adjustments in the patient's medications. At night, nurses frequently administer whatever sedatives they can from the medication list just to keep patients asleep and avoid being disturbed. As a result, in the morning, patients are often lethargic or confused. I've begged doctors to discontinue these meds, but they just don't want to be bothered late at night, so they let it slide. Jerry chairs, large chairs with trays for meals, are sometimes used as an unofficial form of restraint. Nurses will leave patients who are demanding in these chairs and forget to put the call light within reach, leaving them unable to ask for help. Sometimes, patients end up soiling themselves because they can't get anyone's attention. TLDR, don't go to the hospital without a family member or you're in for a rough time. Story 46. I guess this isn't too dark, but I work as a front desk agent at a hotel, and it's pretty normal for my coworkers to come in not just high on weed, which, honestly, isn't that bad and can be helpful sometimes, but also on party drugs like Molly and Coke. It's also not rare for them to drink on the job or show up completely plastered. On top of that, a lot of them steal massive amounts of stuff from the kitchen, things like yogurt, bread, cream cheese, coffee, and butter. They'll also take items from lost and found, towels, linens, romance, and VIP packages, worth about $100 each, feminine hygiene products, office supplies, and more. Even management gets in on it. They're also known to leave early but forget to clock out, then sign out at the time they were originally supposed to leave. It's something I've learned to turn a blind eye to, but it still blows my mind how they get away with it, and the hotel seems completely unaware. Story 47. I work as an apprentice/laborer who mainly cleans up and fills skips for electricians. Honestly, most of the installers around here do half-assed jobs. Those connections behind the sockets you see, they're probably not safe or wired to a professional standard by qualified electricians. I've been shocked at how many amateurs are doing the wiring. Hotels usually have some handyman with no qualifications and basic knowledge handling the electrical work. They only call in a licensed electrician when something blows up or shorts out an entire room. Retailers are the worst. They use proper mains boards, but buy cheap, no-name RBOs and other components for them. These parts don't fit properly and are generally terrible quality. We went to one place where the manager said they had a problem with the mains board, so they assessed it and decided to call us because they couldn't figure it out. They actually tried to get shop floor workers to fix a mains fault. When we got there, we found blast marks on the panel door, and the wiring was a mess. My boss decided to stay out of it and said he'd only condemn the whole system and replace the mains with a new one. They refused to do that and are probably looking for a cheaper option elsewhere. Story 48. A while back, at my first job working at a movie theater, I noticed that the higher-ups and a few favored employees had a trick for stealing from the company. They'd tear off the wrong end of your ticket stub or wait until the movie was over and scrounge the ground for discarded stubs. Then, they'd start refunding tickets for the full price using fake phone numbers and personal info. Sometimes it was for cash to get by between paychecks, and other times it was to cover up when the cash register was short at the end of the night. One of my buddies, who was close with a manager, would regularly pocket an extra $1,000 per pay period, sometimes reaching $2,000 during the busy holiday and summer rushes. Just for clarity, movie theaters only make a small amount, like 2 to 10 cents per ticket, based on how long the movie's been playing. They really only make money from concessions, which is why they'd funnel money from the ticket booth into the concessions to cover any missing cash by the end of the day. Story 49. I worked at a small cafe in town about a year and a half ago, and honestly, I hated every minute of it. It was a tiny place with just me, 3 other coworkers, and the boss. Right from the start, they all seemed to dislike me. I'm naturally shy and more submissive, which, in the past, people have often seen as a weakness to take advantage of. In this high-pressure environment, they took full advantage of it. I ended up doing all the dirty work, literally cleaning the disgusting single bathroom for customers, among other things. I didn't mind doing these tasks, but the worst part was that they'd either stand around watching me or say things like, "You missed a spot," while sipping their tea. The boss treated me terribly, making snide remarks, and so did the other women. One woman in particular, Pat, because that's her name, was especially awful. She was much older than me, probably in her late 50s, and bitter toward any younger woman. On her rare, friendly days, she'd boast about partying all night with the boys in town, laughing about how she hoped her boyfriend wouldn't find out. She was short, overweight, and had a smoker's voice. She was constantly nasty to me. One day, while I was making a latte for a customer, she stood next to me and said, "You're doing it wrong." I asked her, "Would you mind showing me how to do it?" She just scoffed and said, "Learn yourself." On top of that, I found out that, on 2 separate occasions, she was caught stealing 20 pounds from the till on camera. The boss apparently felt sorry for her, but if I ever dropped a hair out of my cap, I'd get screamed at in front of customers. Then, to my surprise, after I'd been there a year, Pat was suddenly gone. I found out she was fired for having a threesome with the boss' cousin and his friend at work. A greasy, disgusting situation in a place where people eat, all involving the most callous woman I've ever met. Pack got canned, and a few months later, the boss started pushing it with me. I ended up leaving on my own. 10 out of 10 would not recommend working there. Story 50. Years ago, there was a common laboratory procedure in the scientific field I work in that we now know to be highly neurotoxic. At the time, however, it was considered perfectly safe and harmless, with no obvious symptoms to indicate its dangers. Several leading pioneers in the field tragically took their own lives, and it's now understood, though rarely discussed, that this practice may have played a role in the depression and other behavioral issues, such as a lack of risk aversion, that led some brilliant individuals to die far too young. The topic is largely avoided today, partly because the practice is no longer used, and speculating about it won't bring any answers. But there's another reason. Many of the senior figures in the field today knew some of these men personally, and may have used this method themselves toward the end of its use. No one wants to confront the possibility that these cherished mentors were slowly poisoned, and perhaps even more unsettling, no one wants to face the reality that there may be a hidden cost for those who are still living. Individuals who have built their lives and identities largely through their intellect. Story 51. I work in a prison, and technically, no one is ever officially pronounced dead within the facility. If you find someone unresponsive, you're supposed to perform CPR until medical staff arrive, and they continue until EMS shows up. Even if the person is already dead, it doesn't matter. Once EMS leaves the fence, they can declare the person deceased, but not inside the facility. It's not like deaths are common, but we did have an inmate pass away a few years ago due to pre-existing health issues. They died in their sleep, and had even been accounted for during the nightly head count. When morning came, they were found dead. CPR was done, medical staff arrived, and EMS showed up and finally declared them dead outside the fence. It's a pretty messed up situation. Thankfully, we have a solid medical team, and any high-risk inmates are sent to a different facility better equipped to handle such issues. Staff are also better trained now to only count someone at night if you can actually see them move or breathe. Just seeing a limb or a face isn't enough. If I can't tell if they're breathing because of how they're laying, I'll make a noise to check if they respond. I'd rather briefly disturb someone's sleep to make sure they're alive than rush through the count and later find out someone passed away on my watch. Story 52. I used to work at a large real estate company that had quarterly trips, and let me tell you, things got out of hand quickly. On my first trip, one of the managers got so drunk he ended up stumbling into someone else's room while they were in the shower. He couldn't find the bathroom, so he just went on the floor instead. Realizing he was in the wrong room, he left without saying anything. This same manager was later caught for drunk driving. He had a night out, and the police pulled him over because he was driving erratically with two blondes hanging out of his sunroof. The company didn't fire him. They just took away his car while he was banned from driving and gave it back once the ban was over. On another trip, a high-ranking employee who thought he was untouchable would do coke in the office, inappropriately touch female colleagues, and even got caught drink driving. The company took away his car, but he still kept his job. During that trip, he crossed the line and punched a female colleague when she refused to sleep with him, claiming she was leading him on. Oh, and during that same trip, someone stole another hotel guest's dog and left it in a colleague's room as a joke. Beyond the trips, there were the usual office affairs, with people cheating on their spouses, but no one ever said anything when the wives showed up with their babies at the end of the day. It was all just disgusting. Story 53. I used to work at a company where I was fired under very questionable circumstances, which led to me filing a lawsuit for whistleblower retaliation, over $50,000 in unpaid overtime, illegal termination, and other claims. The company's attorney essentially told my lawyer, "We didn't do anything wrong, but let's settle this before it goes to mediation or litigation." So, a settlement is in the works now. Apparently, this is a standard approach. No one admits to wrongdoing, but six-figure settlement offers are on the table. The dark secrets at the company include false information on their website, several instances of neglecting industry policies they should have followed to stay compliant, sloppy business practices, and misleading employees, including myself, about their rights. The settlement may bring some justice for how I was treated, but now my concern is how to explain being fired to future employers. Telling them that I'm suing my old employer doesn't seem like a good strategy, no matter the reasons behind it. I want potential employers to understand that my firing wasn't due to poor job performance. but rather because I spoke up too often about things that should have been kept quiet, at least if I wanted to keep my job. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.